The distant rumble of thunder echoed across the vast Colorado prairie as Katherine Galloway stood at her kitchen window, watching dark clouds gather on the horizon. At 32, she had already weathered storms far worse than any nature could conjure: the death of her husband, the struggle to maintain their modest homestead alone, and the constant worry about putting enough food on the table for herself and her 7-year-old son, Samuel. But Katherine, or Kate as most folks in Montrose called her, had the resilient spirit of a true frontier woman, even when hope seemed as scarce as rain in August. The year was 1887, and Montrose, Colorado, was transforming from a rugged mining settlement into a proper town with each passing month. The railroad had arrived 2 years prior, bringing with it new opportunities and new faces. Yet for Kate, whose husband Thomas had died in a mining accident 18 months ago, the prosperity sweeping through town seemed to flow around her little farm rather than through it. She wiped her flour-dusted hands on her apron and turned back to the bread dough she was kneading. 3 extra loaves today, not for her table, but for the elderly couple who lived in the small ranch house at the edge of town. The Owens were well into their 70s now, and though Kate had never formally met their son, the wealthy cattle baron who owned half the county but rarely showed his face in town, she had taken to bringing them meals twice a week after she'd spotted Mrs. Owens struggling to carry groceries home one afternoon. "Samuel," Kate called to her son, who was playing with wooden horses on the floor, "time to wash up. We're taking the bread to the Owens house before the storm hits." "Yes, Mama," Samuel replied, carefully arranging his toys before heading to the wash basin. An hour later, with the bread wrapped in clean cloths and nestled in a basket, Kate and Samuel made their way toward the Owens ranch house. The modest dwelling stood in stark contrast to the sprawling cattle empire. It represented a humble beginning to what had become one of the largest ranching operations in western Colorado. Martha Owens answered the door with a warm smile that crinkled her weathered face. "Katherine, dear, you're an angel. Come in before the rain catches you." Samuel darted inside, already comfortable with the elderly couple who treated him like the grandchild they rarely saw. George Owens sat in his rocking chair, his gnarled hands resting on a walking stick. "Mrs. Galloway," he nodded respectfully, "you're too kind to old folks like us." "It's nothing, truly," Kate replied, setting the basket on their kitchen table. "I was baking anyway. How's your hip today, Mr. Owens?" "Same as yesterday, stubborn and ornery, just like its owner," he chuckled. Kate moved about their kitchen with practiced ease, putting on a kettle for tea and arranging the fresh bread on a plate. She had just begun slicing one loaf when the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew everyone's attention. "That'll be the doctor," Martha said, looking toward the window. "George has been having those spells again, and I sent word to town this morning." But the rider who dismounted from the magnificent black stallion was no doctor. Even through the rain-streaked window, Kate could see he was tall and imposing, dressed in fine clothes that nonetheless showed the dust of hard riding. He moved with the confident stride of a man accustomed to command, removing his hat as he entered without knocking. Water dripped from his dark coat onto the wooden floor as he stood in the doorway, his expression shifting from determination to confusion at the domestic scene before him. Kate froze, knife in hand, feeling suddenly out of place as Martha Owens exclaimed with delight, "Daniel. What a wonderful surprise. We weren't expecting you for another month at least." Daniel Owens, the absent son, the cattle king of Montrose County, surveyed the room with piercing blue eyes that finally came to rest on Kate. There was something unsettling about his gaze, a mixture of curiosity and suspicion that made her straighten her spine defensively. "Mother," he said, his voice deep but controlled as he bent to kiss Martha's cheek, though his eyes never left Kate. "Father, I came as soon as I got your letter." "You didn't mention you had help." George cleared his throat. "This is Mrs. Galloway and her boy, Samuel. They've been a godsend these past months, bringing food and helping your mother with chores when these old bones of mine won't cooperate." Daniel's expression remained unreadable as he finally turned to acknowledge his father with a firm handshake. "I see. And what arrangement have you made for this service?" The question hung in the air, carrying an edge that made Kate's cheeks burn. Before either of the elder Owens could respond, she stepped forward. "There is no arrangement, Mr. Owens. Your parents are kind neighbors who have shared their wisdom and stories with my son. The bread and occasional stew are merely tokens of friendship." Daniel's eyebrows rose slightly, perhaps surprised at her direct manner. Standing this close, Kate could see the fine lines around his eyes, evidence that despite his wealth, he was no stranger to sun and wind. She guessed him to be in his late 30s, though the gravity in his expression made him seem older. "Friendship," he repeated, as if testing the word. "Admirable. Still, my parents' welfare is my concern, Mrs. Galloway, and I prefer to understand who involves themselves with my family." Kate felt her back stiffen. "Your concern is noted, Mr. Owens. However, I'm hardly involving myself. I'm simply being neighborly while you're away attending to your business interests." The implied criticism wasn't lost on him. Something flickered in his eyes, perhaps anger, perhaps respect, before he turned away to remove his wet coat. "Daniel," Martha chided gently, "Katherine has been nothing but kind. We couldn't manage half as well without her checking in on us." The millionaire rancher looked from his mother's earnest face to his father's stubborn one, then back to Kate, who refused to drop her gaze despite the intimidating figure he cut. "I apologize if I've given offense, Mrs. Galloway," he said finally, though his tone suggested the words cost him. "My parents' well-being is paramount to me, as is my son's to me," she replied evenly, "which is why we should be heading home before this storm worsens. Samuel." The boy appeared reluctantly from the corner where he'd been silently watching the adults, clutching one of the carved wooden figures George had made for him. "Do we have to go already?" "I'm afraid so, darling. Say thank you to Mr. and Mrs. Owens." As Samuel dutifully thanked the elderly couple, Daniel Owens moved to the window, looking out at the rapidly darkening sky. When he turned back, his expression had softened marginally. "The storm's breaking. I'll drive you home in my carriage. That won't be necessary. We walked here and we can walk back." "It's not a request, Mrs. Galloway," he said firmly. "There's lightning on the horizon." Before Kate could protest further, Martha placed a gentle hand on her arm. "Please, dear, it would ease my mind to know you got home safely." Unable to refuse the kind woman, Kate nodded reluctantly. "Very well. Thank you, Mr. Owens." The carriage ride was tense and largely silent. Daniel handled the team with expert skill through the increasingly heavy rain, while Samuel pressed his face to the window in delight at riding in such a fine vehicle. Kate sat rigidly on the plush seat, uncomfortably aware of the stark contrast between her mended dress and the obvious luxury surrounding her. "How long have you lived in Montrose, Mrs. Galloway?" Daniel finally asked, breaking the silence. "Nearly 5 years. My husband and I came west from Pennsylvania after we married. And your husband died in the Silver Creek mine collapse last year." She kept her voice steady with practiced control. Daniel nodded, his expression softening slightly. "I remember hearing about that. I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you." Kate turned to look out the window, hoping to end the conversation. "And you've managed the farm alone since then," she sighed. "Mr. Owens, while I appreciate the ride home, I don't see how my circumstances are any concern of yours." His hands tightened momentarily on the reins. "When someone takes an interest in my elderly parents, I make it my business to know their motives." "Motives?" Kate turned to him in disbelief. "Mr. Owens, I bring your parents bread and conversation twice a week. I'm hardly plotting to swindle them out of their fortune." A muscle twitched in his jaw. "You'd be surprised what people are capable of, Mrs. Galloway." "Yes," she replied coolly, "I would." They arrived at her small farmhouse, a modest structure with a sagging porch and weathered clapboards that had once been white, and Kate couldn't help noticing how Daniel's gaze took in every detail of her humble circumstances. "Thank you for the ride, Mr. Owens," she said formally as she helped Samuel down from the carriage. He nodded, his expression unreadable. "Mrs. Galloway, I'll be staying in Montrose for some time. I'd like to compensate you for your kindness to my parents." "That won't be necessary," Kate replied, her pride flaring. "As I said, it's simply being neighborly." Everyone has their price, Mrs. Galloway, he said, not unkindly, but with the certainty of a man accustomed to buying what he wanted. Kate's eyes flashed. Perhaps in your world, Mr. Owens. Good day. She turned and hurried through the rain to her porch, Samuel's hand tight in hers, refusing to look back at the man who had just managed to insult her twice in the span of a 5-minute conversation. Behind her, Daniel Owens watched thoughtfully before clicking to his horses and turning the carriage around. His visit to Montrose had just become considerably more interesting than anticipated. The following morning dawned clear and brilliant, the storm having washed the world clean. Kate rose early as always, tending to her chickens and the small vegetable garden that provided most of their food. Her encounter with Daniel Owens had left her unsettled, his insinuations about her motives pricking at her pride. She was hanging laundry on the line, her mind still churning over yesterday's events, when the sound of approaching horses made her look up. To her dismay, Daniel Owens himself was riding toward her house, leading a packhorse laden with burlap sacks. Kate smoothed her work dress and tucked a loose strand of chestnut hair behind her ear, determined to maintain her dignity despite being caught in the midst of chores. "Good morning, Mrs. Galloway," Daniel called, dismounting with the fluid grace of a man who had spent his life in the saddle. "Mr. Owens," she acknowledged coolly. "What brings you to my farm?" He gestured to the loaded packhorse. "Flour, sugar, coffee, bacon, and a side of beef. Consider it payment for services rendered to my parents." Kate stared at him incredulously. "I told you yesterday I don't want payment." "Your parents' friendship is enough." Daniel's expression hardened slightly. "Mrs. Galloway, I've had the opportunity to inspect your property. Your fences need mending, your roof has at least 2 leaks I could spot from the road, and that plow sitting by your barn won't make it through another season. So you've come to catalog my failings as a farmer?" Kate asked, her voice tight with anger and embarrassment. "I've come to acknowledge that a widow with a young son might have better uses for her resources than feeding my perfectly well-provided for parents," he replied evenly. Kate crossed her arms. "And it doesn't occur to you that perhaps your perfectly well-provided for parents might be lonely with their sons so often absent?" The barb struck home. She could see it in the momentary flash of guilt that crossed his face before his expression settled back into careful neutrality. "My business interests require my attention," he said stiffly. "I can't be in Montrose as often as I might wish. Yet you can afford to lavish food on unwilling neighbors." Kate shook her head. "Mr. Owens, while I appreciate the gesture, I cannot accept charity. We manage well enough." Daniel studied her for a long moment, taking in her proud stance despite the patches on her dress and the worn-down heels of her boots. Something shifted in his expression. "Very well," he said finally. "Not charity, then. A business proposition." "I'm not interested in business propositions either," Kate replied warily. "Hear me out," he insisted. "My parents have grown fond of you and the boy. They light up when speaking of your visits. I'd like to hire you properly as their companion and housekeeper while I'm in town. You'd prepare meals, help with light housekeeping, and provide the companionship they clearly value." Kate hesitated. The offer was tempting. Proper employment would ease her financial worries considerably. But the man himself made her uneasy with his scrutinizing gaze and apparent ability to see through her careful pride to the desperation beneath. "And when you leave town again?" she asked cautiously. "We would renegotiate, but I intend to stay through the winter at least. My Denver business can be managed by wire for a time." Kate considered her empty pantry, Samuel's 2 small shoes, and the leaking roof Daniel had correctly identified. Pride was a luxury she perhaps couldn't afford. "I would need to bring Samuel with me," she said finally. Daniel nodded. "My father seems to enjoy the boys' company. You'd have Sundays to yourself and $2 a week." $2 was generous, too generous for the work described. Kate narrowed her eyes suspiciously. "Why? Why what? Why pay so much for so little work? And why me specifically?" Daniel's mouth quirked in what might have been amusement. "Because my mother likes you, and my father is a stubborn old man who won't accept help from anyone he hasn't chosen himself. They've chosen you. The amount is inconsequential to me, but I gather it might be consequential to you." The assessment was accurate but stung nonetheless. Kate lifted her chin. If I accept, the food goes back with you. I'll earn my way, Mr. Owens. I won't be beholden. He studied her for a long moment before nodding slowly. As you wish, Mrs. Galloway. Though I think you misunderstand the nature of neighborly assistance. And I think you misunderstand the nature of pride, Mr. Owens, she countered. It's often all a person has left when everything else is taken away. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or reluctant respect. You begin tomorrow, 8 o'clock, he said, turning to remount his horse. The food stays as an advance on your wages. Before Kate could protest, he had swung onto his saddle and was guiding both horses back toward town, leaving her staring after him in frustration. Samuel emerged from the house, where he'd been watching through the window. Who was that man, Mama? Why was he bringing us food? Kate sighed, putting an arm around her son's shoulders. That was Mr. Daniel Owens, Martha and George's son. And it seems I'm going to be working for him for a while. At their house, with the wooden horses. Samuel's face brightened. Despite her misgivings, Kate smiled at her son's enthusiasm. Yes, at their house. But remember what I've told you about rich folks, Samuel. We must always maintain our dignity, no matter our circumstances. Yes, Mama, he nodded solemnly, though his eyes strayed to the bulging sacks of provisions Daniel had left behind. Kate followed his gaze and sighed again. Dignity was important, but a full stomach for her growing boy perhaps more so. She would accept Daniel Owens's arrangement, but she would make very certain he understood she was nobody's charity case. The next morning, Kate dressed in her best work dress, faded but clean and carefully mended, and walked with Samuel to the Owens ranch house. She'd spent half the night turning over Daniel's offer in her mind, weighing pride against practicality. In the end, practicality won. The roof wouldn't mend itself, and winter was coming. Martha welcomed them warmly, exclaiming over how handsome Samuel looked with his hair slicked down with water. George was in his usual chair by the fire, but today he had a checkerboard set up beside him. Thought the boy might like to learn, he explained gruffly when Kate raised an eyebrow. There was no sign of Daniel, and Kate felt herself relax slightly as she tied an apron around her waist and began to survey the kitchen. Despite Martha's age, the room was well organized and spotless. Mrs. Owens, there's hardly anything for me to do here, Kate observed, running a finger along the pristine countertop. Martha smiled sheepishly. I may have risen a bit early to tidy up. I didn't want you thinking we live like pigs. I would never think such a thing, Kate assured her. But I am being paid to work, not to visit. Nonsense, Martha waved a hand dismissively. Daniel has more money than sense sometimes. You just help me with the heavier chores and keep us company. That's worth more than any scrubbing. Just as Kate was about to protest, the door opened and Daniel strode in, bringing with him the scent of horses and open air. He'd clearly been riding, and the exercise had brought color to his tanned face. Kate was startled to realize that when not scowling or suspicious, he was a remarkably handsome man. Mrs. Galloway, he nodded, removing his hat. I see you've arrived. As agreed, Kate replied evenly, though your mother seems determined to prevent me from earning my wages. Martha clicked her tongue. The girl wants to clean, Daniel, as if this house isn't tidy enough. Daniel's eyes crinkled slightly at the corners. Mother has always been particular about her domain, Mrs. Galloway. Perhaps today you could help her with the mending. Father's shirts are becoming more patch than original fabric. I can do that, Kate agreed, relieved to have tangible work to justify her presence. And perhaps later you might accompany me to town, Daniel continued, surprising her. I need to purchase supplies, and Mother has a list of items she's been wanting. The carriage would be more comfortable for her with a companion. Kate glanced at Martha, who nodded encouragingly. Of course, she agreed, though the prospect of being alone with Daniel Owens in town where everyone would see them together and surely talk made her stomach flutter uncomfortably. The morning passed pleasantly enough. Kate sat with Martha, mending shirts and listening to stories of the early days when Montrose was little more than a collection of tents and hopeful miners. Samuel and George were engrossed in their checkers game, the old man showing surprising patience with the boys' learning. Daniel had disappeared to his study, emerging only for coffee, which he took black and strong. Each time he passed through, Kate felt his gaze on her, assessing, calculating. It made her nervous in a way she couldn't quite define. After lunch, a simple but hearty stew, Kate prepared from Martha's well-stocked pantry. Daniel announced it was time to go to town. Kate removed her apron and retrieved her threadbare shawl, painfully aware of how shabby it looked next to Daniel's fine coat. "Samuel, you stay here and help Mr. Owens with his whittling," Kate instructed. "Mind your manners." "Yes, Mama," Samuel agreed readily, already fascinated by the piece of wood George was shaping with his pocket knife. The ride to town was less uncomfortable than Kate had anticipated. Daniel seemed content with silence, handling the team with easy confidence while she sat beside him, watching the landscape roll by. "Your son resembles you," he said finally, breaking the quiet. "He has his father's chin," Kate replied, "but my coloring." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "He seems a good boy, well-mannered." "I try my best," Kate said simply. "Without a father's guidance," Daniel observed. It wasn't quite a question, but Kate felt compelled to answer anyway. "A mother's guidance is equally valuable, Mr. Owens. And we women of the frontier are made of sterner stuff than some might believe." He glanced at her, those piercing blue eyes momentarily approving. "I didn't suggest otherwise, Mrs. Galloway, merely acknowledging the challenge." They reached Montrose's Main Street, and as Kate had feared, heads turned to watch Daniel Owens's fine carriage pass with the widow Galloway seated beside him. She kept her eyes forward, ignoring the curious stares. Daniel pulled up in front of the general store and came around to help Kate down from the carriage. His hand was warm and calloused, not the soft grip of a man who merely counted money, but one who still worked with it despite his wealth. "Mr. Owens," the storekeeper greeted effusively as they entered. "What an honor, and Mrs. Galloway too," he added, his tone shifting to something Kate couldn't quite identify. "Mrs. Galloway is helping with my mother's shopping today, Peterson," Daniel said smoothly, his voice carrying enough authority to quell any imminent gossip. "We'll need everything on this list." As the storekeeper bustled to fill the order, Kate wandered the aisles, fingering fabrics she couldn't afford and eyeing practical items she needed but would have to defer. She was examining a sturdy pair of boys' boots when she realized Daniel was watching her. "Samuel needs new shoes for winter," she explained, setting them back on the shelf. Daniel picked them up, examining the price tag. Without comment, he added them to the growing pile on the counter. "Mr. Owens," Kate protested in a low voice, "I can't accept those." "Consider them part of your employment," he replied equally quietly. "My mother would insist if she were here. The boy can't go through winter in worn shoes." Before Kate could argue further, a well-dressed woman entered the store and made directly for Daniel, her face alight with practiced charm. "Daniel Owens, as I live and breathe, when did you return to our little town?" She extended a gloved hand which Daniel took briefly. "Miss Harrington, just yesterday." "And already escorting ladies around town," Miss Harrington observed with a smile that didn't reach her eyes as she turned to Kate. "Mrs. Galloway, isn't it? How resourceful of you." The implication in her tone made Kate's cheeks burn, but Daniel stepped smoothly between them. "Mrs. Galloway is employed as my mother's companion, Miss Harrington, a position for which she is eminently qualified, unlike others who have applied." His tone was polite but carried an edge that made the other woman's smile falter. "How fortunate for her," Miss Harrington replied, her voice tight. "Well, I do hope you'll attend the Harvest Social next weekend, Daniel. Your presence has been sorely missed at town functions." "We'll see," he said noncommittally. "Peterson, we'll take those items now." The storekeeper, who had been avidly watching the exchange, jumped to attention. "Of course, Mr. Owens. Shall I put it on your account?" "Yes." Daniel turned to Kate. "Is there anything else you require for my parents' household?" The deliberate emphasis on my parents' household was not lost on either woman. Kate shook her head, unwilling to prolong the uncomfortable encounter. As they left the store, parcels loaded into the carriage, Kate could feel Miss Harrington's eyes boring into her back. "Victoria Harrington has been attempting to secure my attention for several years," Daniel explained as he helped Kate into the carriage. "She finds my reluctance vexing." I can imagine, Kate murmured, remembering the woman's hostile gaze. She's very beautiful. She's very calculating, Daniel corrected, climbing up beside her. Beauty without kindness holds little appeal for me. The statement surprised Kate, who had assumed Daniel's wealth would naturally draw him to someone like Victoria Harrington, beautiful, well-connected, and from his own social sphere. You disagree? He asked, noticing her expression. It's not my place to have opinions on your personal affairs, Mr. Owens, Kate replied carefully. Daniel's mouth quirked in that almost smile. Yet you clearly do. I find I'm curious about what a woman like you thinks of a woman like Victoria Harrington. A woman like me. Kate repeated, raising an eyebrow, direct, honest, uninterested in artifice. He flicked the reins, setting the horses in motion. Qualities Miss Harrington notably lacks. Kate wasn't sure if she'd been complimented or not. I think, she said slowly, that people often seek partners who reflect what they believe about themselves or what they wish to believe. Perhaps Miss Harrington represents something you feel is expected of a man in your position. Daniel gave her a sidelong glance. That's remarkably insightful, Mrs. Galloway. Are all widows so philosophical about marriage, or is that unique to you? Losing a husband tends to clarify one's thinking on many subjects, Kate replied, looking out at the familiar storefronts as they passed. Including the value of genuine connection over societal expectations. They continued to the dressmaker's shop and the apothecary, completing Martha's errands with efficient courtesy. By the time they headed back to the ranch, Kate had almost forgotten her initial discomfort with Daniel's presence. Almost, but not entirely, there remained something unsettling about the way he looked at her when he thought she wouldn't notice, as if trying to solve a particularly complex puzzle. When they returned, Samuel was proudly displaying a small wooden horse George had helped him carve. The elderly man looked more animated than Kate had ever seen him, explaining to his son how the boy had a natural gift for detail work. "Mama, look," Samuel exclaimed. "Mr. Owens says I can keep it." "That's wonderful, darling," Kate smiled, relieved to see her son so happy. The farm was an isolating place for a child, with few playmates nearby. Here, he had not only toys and attention, but the grandfatherly guidance he otherwise lacked. As Kate prepared dinner that evening, a hearty roast with vegetables that would have been beyond her means at home, she found herself reflecting on the strange turn her life had taken. A week ago, she had been a struggling widow wondering how to make ends meet through another hard winter. Now she was cooking in a comfortable kitchen, her son playing contentedly nearby, with the security of steady wages ahead. The only complication was Daniel Owens himself, inscrutable, commanding, yet occasionally revealing flashes of a more complex character beneath his wealthy rancher facade. A man who noticed worn-out boots and understood a mother's pride. A man whose gaze sometimes lingered on her in a way that made her heart beat faster despite her determination to remain professionally detached. Kate pushed these thoughts aside as she called the family to dinner. Whatever Daniel Owens might be thinking, she reminded herself firmly, she was here as an employee, nothing more. The fact that her employer happened to be a handsome, unmarried man of means was irrelevant to her position. If only her traitorous heart would remember that fact as readily as her mind. The days fell into a comfortable routine. Each morning, Kate and Samuel would walk to the Owens ranch, where she would help Martha with household tasks, while Samuel alternated between playing with his carved animals and learning checkers from George. Daniel was often absent during the days, riding out to oversee his vast ranching operations or meeting with business associates in town. Yet he was invariably present at dinner, when Kate would serve the meal she had prepared, before gathering her things to return home. Each evening, he would insist on driving them back to their farm in his carriage, despite Kate's protests that the exercise and fresh air did them good. "It will be winter soon enough," he would say. "Plenty of bracing air then." These evening rides became an unexpected highlight of Kate's day. Daniel proved to be a knowledgeable conversationalist on topics ranging from cattle breeding to literature, and Kate found herself engaging in debates and discussions that stimulated her mind in ways she had missed since her husband's death. "You surprise me, Mrs. Galloway, Daniel remarked one evening as they discussed a volume of Emerson's essays she had borrowed from his library. Not many in Montrose share your interest in transcendentalist philosophy. My father was a schoolteacher, Kate explained. Education was valued in our home, even for daughters. Especially for daughters, I would think, Daniel observed. You have a natural intellectual curiosity that would have been wasted otherwise. The compliment warmed her more than it should have. Thank you, Mr. Owens. Though I doubt my opinions on Emerson will help much with mending fences or raising chickens. Perhaps not directly, he agreed with that hint of a smile, but they make you interesting company. The word hung between them in the darkening evening, a simple compliment, yet carrying undertones that made Kate suddenly aware of how close they sat on the carriage seat, how the fading light softened his strong features, how his eyes lingered on her face a moment too long before returning to the road ahead. October slipped into November, bringing frost-covered mornings and earlier sunsets. Kate began bringing preserves from her own pantry to supplement the Owens stores, taking quiet pride in Martha's delight at her blackberry jam and pickled beans. "These are wonderful, Catherine," Martha exclaimed after tasting the jam. "You must show me your method next summer." The casual assumption that Kate would still be in their lives months hence gave her an unexpected pang. Her arrangement with Daniel had no defined end point, but surely once winter passed and he returned to his business interests in Denver, her services would no longer be required. The thought troubled her more than it should have, and she found herself watching Daniel with new awareness, noting the way his expression softened when he spoke to his parents, how his hands moved with surprising gentleness when helping his father from chair to table, the respect with which he treated even the lowliest ranch hand. He was not the cold, calculating businessman she had first assumed, but a complex man with deep attachments to family and land. A man who, despite his wealth, still rose before dawn and often returned with clothes dust covered from working alongside his men. One afternoon in mid-November, Kate was kneading dough for bread when Daniel entered the kitchen, his expression grave. "Mrs. Galloway, might I have a word?" Kate wiped her hands on her apron, a flutter of anxiety in her stomach. Had she somehow displeased him? Was her position to be terminated? "Of course, Mr. Owens." He led her to his study, a room she had cleaned but rarely entered when he was present. Closing the door, he gestured to a chair before taking his own seat behind a massive oak desk. "I've been to your farm today," he said without preamble. Kate stiffened. "May I ask why?" "To assess the repairs needed before winter sets in properly." He met her gaze directly. "The roof requires immediate attention. The north fence is completely down in 2 sections, and your barn door is hanging by a single hinge." Heat rose in Kate's cheeks, partly embarrassment at having her poverty so clinically catalogued, partly indignation at the intrusion. "Mr. Owens, while I appreciate your concern, my farm is not your responsibility." "I disagree," he said calmly. "You are caring for my parents with admirable dedication. Ensuring you have a secure home to return to is the least I can do in return." "I'm being paid for my work," Kate reminded him. "Quite generously. Whatever my farm needs, I can address with my wages over time." Daniel leaned forward, his expression intense. "Mrs. Galloway, Catherine, winter is coming. Your roof won't last through the first heavy snow. This isn't charity, it's practical concern for a valued employee." The use of her given name startled her, as did the genuine worry in his voice. Still, her pride resisted. "I can't allow you to make such extensive repairs. People would talk." "People already talk," he countered. "Let them. I care more about your and Samuel's well-being than town gossip." Kate looked down at her flour-dusted hands, conflicted. The repairs were desperately needed, she knew that better than anyone. Yet accepting such significant help from her employer crossed a boundary she had carefully maintained. "What would you expect in return?" she asked quietly, Daniel's brow furrowed. "Nothing beyond what you already provide my family. Your continued employment would be ample compensation." "Mr. Owens," Kate said carefully, "I hope you understand why a widow might be wary of accepting such substantial assistance from a single gentleman. Regardless of your intentions, appearances matter in a small town. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by something that might have been hurt before his expression smoothed into neutrality. I assure you, Mrs. Galloway, my offer comes with no hidden expectations. I would send my ranch hands to do the work while you are here with my parents. You need not even be present. Kate considered this, weighing her practical needs against her principles. Finally, she sighed. I would accept the roof repairs only, and insist on repaying you through additional work, perhaps tending to your correspondence or household accounts. Something that utilizes skills beyond cooking and cleaning. Daniel studied her for a moment before nodding slowly. That seems a fair compromise. Though I must insist on the barn door as well, your chickens will freeze otherwise. Despite herself, Kate smiled at his persistence. Very well, the roof and the barn door, but I will find a way to repay your kindness, Mr. Owens. Daniel, he said suddenly. If we're to be engaged in negotiations over farm repairs, perhaps you might call me Daniel. The request hung in the air between them, a small but significant shift in their relationship. After a moment's hesitation, Kate nodded. Daniel, she agreed softly. And you may call me Katherine if you wish. Katherine, he repeated, and something in the way he said her name made her breath catch. Thank you for accepting my help, however conditionally. As she left his study, Kate felt as though something fundamental had changed between them, a barrier lowered, a new understanding established. Whether this was cause for concern or celebration, she wasn't entirely sure. True to his word, Daniel sent a crew of ranch hands to repair Kate's roof and barn door the very next day. When she and Samuel returned home that evening, they found not only the promised repairs completed but additional improvements. The porch steps had been rebuilt, the well crank replaced, and a cord of seasoned firewood stacked neatly by the door. Kate ran her hand along the sturdy new roof edge, emotion tightening her throat. So much worry lifted from her shoulders with these repairs, worry she had carried alone since Thomas's death, trying to maintain a property too large for one woman to manage properly. Mr. Owens is nice, isn't he, Mama? Samuel observed as they entered their warmer, more secure home. Yes, Kate admitted, thinking of the thoughtfulness behind these repairs, how Daniel had anticipated needs she hadn't even voiced. Yes, he is. The following Sunday, Kate's day off, she spent the morning baking a special apple pie with the last of her stored fruit. In the afternoon, she and Samuel walked to the Owens ranch, not for work but to deliver the pie as a thank-you gesture. She had expected to leave it with Martha, but it was Daniel who answered the door, dressed more casually than she had ever seen him, in a simple flannel shirt and denims. Katherine, he said, surprise evident in his voice, it's your day off. I know, she replied, suddenly self-conscious about her impulse to come. I just wanted to thank you properly for the repairs. They were far more extensive than we agreed upon. Daniel's gaze softened as he looked at the pie in her hands. You baked for us, on your day of rest. It's nothing elaborate, she said quickly. Just apples from my tree. Come in, he stepped back, opening the door wider. My parents are napping, but they'll be delighted to see you when they wake. Kate hesitated, aware that entering the house on her day off with only Daniel present and awake might fuel exactly the kind of gossip she'd been concerned about. Yet refusing seemed ungracious after his generosity. Just for a moment, she agreed, ushering Samuel in ahead of her. In the kitchen, Daniel took the pie and set it on the counter, then surprised her by beginning to prepare coffee without asking. The domestic gesture seemed incongruous from a man of his standing, and she watched with undisguised curiosity as he competently measured grounds and heated water. Catching her expression, he smiled slightly. I wasn't born wealthy, Katherine. I lived in a one-room cabin until I was 12 and made my first cattle drive at 14. My mother made sure I could fend for myself before she'd let me strike out on my own. This glimpse into his past intrigued her. How did you build your empire then, if you don't mind my asking? Daniel leaned against the counter while the coffee brewed, considering his answer. Hard work initially, then smart investments during the silver boom. I bought distressed ranches when others were rushing to mining claims, built my herds while beef prices were low, and was positioned perfectly when the railroad arrived and prices soared. And now you're the cattle king of Montrose County, Kate observed, accepting the cup of coffee he offered. It was surprisingly good. A title I neither claimed nor particularly wanted, he replied, gesturing for her to sit at the kitchen table while Samuel wandered to the window to watch birds at the feeder. Success brings its own complications, such as Victoria Harrington. Kate asked before she could stop herself. Daniel's eyebrows rose, but he chuckled. Among others. Suddenly, everyone wants something from you: your money, your influence, your name. It becomes difficult to trust anyone's motives. The statement reminded Kate of their first meeting when he had questioned her intentions toward his parents. Is that why you were suspicious of me? You thought I wanted something from your family? He had the grace to look somewhat abashed. I've grown cautious over the years, perhaps overly so. But you, he studied her over the rim of his cup. You're something of an anomaly, Katherine Galloway. How so? You resist help almost as fiercely as you offer it to others. You value independence above comfort, and you seem genuinely unimpressed by wealth. His eyes held hers. It's refreshing. Kate felt warmth rising in her cheeks at his direct gaze and candid assessment. I'm not unimpressed by what you've accomplished, she clarified. Just uninterested in measuring a person's worth by their material success. And how do you measure worth? He asked softly. Kate considered the question carefully. By kindness, by integrity, by how one treats those who can offer nothing in return. Daniel nodded slowly. By that measure, you are a wealthy woman indeed, Katherine. The compliment hung in the air between them, sincere and warming. Before Kate could respond, they heard movement from down the hall, Martha or George awakening from their nap. We should go, Kate said quickly, standing up. Thank you for the coffee. And thank you for the pie, Daniel replied, rising as well, though you owed no thanks for the repairs. I was happy to help. As Kate gathered Samuel and prepared to leave, Daniel walked them to the door. On the porch, he hesitated, then asked, Will you and Samuel join us for Thanksgiving dinner? My parents would be delighted, and it seems wrong for you to celebrate alone. The invitation touched her. Thanksgiving had loomed as a difficult day, the first without Thomas, with limited means for celebration. Still, she hesitated. I wouldn't want to intrude on your family time. You wouldn't be intruding, Daniel assured her. You've become important to my parents these past months, to all of us, he added, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her heart quicken. Then we would be honored, Kate accepted softly. Thank you, Daniel. As they walked home through the golden late afternoon light, Kate found herself reflecting on the strange journey that had brought her to this point, from wary acquaintances to something warming toward friendship with the Owens family. With Daniel. She told herself firmly that the flutter in her stomach when he looked at her was merely gratitude for his kindness, nothing more. A widow with a young son had no business developing tender feelings for a man so far above her station, regardless of how his smile made her feel or how thoughtfully he treated her. Yet as November deepened toward Thanksgiving, Kate found herself taking extra care with her appearance each morning, noting with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety which days Daniel would be present at the ranch and which would take him away on business. Thanksgiving Day dawned bright and cold, with a dusting of early snow that made the world glitter. Kate dressed Samuel in his best clothes, now supplemented by the sturdy new boots Daniel had purchased, and took special care with her own appearance, wearing her one good dress, a deep green wool that brought out the hazel of her eyes. Martha had insisted Kate not prepare any of the meal, declaring Thanksgiving her domain. When they arrived, the house was warm with delicious aromas and festively decorated with pine boughs and dried berries. Katherine, Samuel, welcome, welcome, Martha greeted them joyfully. George is in the parlor with Daniel. Go on in while I finish up here. Daniel rose when they entered, his eyes warming as they took in Kate's appearance. He was handsomely dressed in a tailored suit that emphasized his broad shoulders, his dark hair neatly combed. Katherine, he said, taking her hand briefly. You look lovely. Thank you, she replied, feeling a blush rise in her cheeks. And thank you again for including us today. George beckoned Samuel over to show him a new wooden figure he'd carved a turkey, appropriately enough, while Daniel guided Kate to a comfortable chair near the fire. May I offer you some cider? Mother has been mulling it all morning. That sounds wonderful, Kate accepted, settling into the chair and looking around at the comfortable room, festively decorated for the holiday. As Daniel handed her the steaming mug, their fingers brushed, and Kate felt a jolt of awareness at the brief contact. Their eyes met over the rim of the cup, and something in Daniel's gaze made her breath catch. The moment was broken when Martha called them all to the dining room, where a magnificent feast was laid out: roast turkey, stuffing, cranberry sauce, mashed potatoes, and 3 different kinds of pie. "Martha, this is extraordinary," Kate exclaimed. "You've outdone yourself." "With some help from that ranch cook of Daniel's," Martha admitted with a wink. "I'm not as young as I once was." They gathered around the table, and Daniel, at the head, asked them to join hands for grace. Kate felt the warm strength of his fingers curled around hers, the rough calluses evidence of a man who didn't shirk physical labor despite his wealth. "Lord," Daniel began, his deep voice solemn, "we thank you for this food and the hands that prepared it. For family both by blood and by choice," he squeezed Kate's hand slightly at these words, "and for your many blessings through another year." "Amen. Amen," the others echoed, and as they released hands, Kate felt the lingering warmth of Daniel's touch. The meal was filled with laughter and conversation. George, more animated than Kate had ever seen him, told stories of early Thanksgiving celebrations when they had first settled in Montrose territory. Martha fussed over Samuel, delighting in his boyish appetite and earnest questions. And Daniel. Daniel watched Kate with a warmth in his eyes that made her both nervous and exhilarated. After the meal, while Martha and Kate cleared dishes, despite Daniel's protests that it was a holiday, Samuel fell asleep by the fire, lulled by a full stomach and the comfortable warmth. "Poor little fellow," Martha smiled fondly. "Reminds me of Daniel at that age, all energy until suddenly it runs out." Kate glanced at her sleeping son with a tender smile. "He's had a wonderful day. You've all been so kind to us." Martha patted Kate's hand. "My dear, you've brought life back into this house. Before you started coming around, George hardly spoke some days. Now he's carving again, telling stories. Even Daniel seems more settled when you're here." Kate didn't know how to respond to this observation, which echoed thoughts she'd barely allowed herself to acknowledge. Before she could formulate a reply, Daniel appeared in the doorway. "Mother, Father would like his medicine now. And Katherine, may I show you something while Mother tends to him?" Curious, Kate followed Daniel through the house and up a narrow staircase she hadn't climbed before. At the top was a door leading to what appeared to be a small observatory, a round room with windows facing in all directions, and a telescope positioned to face the eastern sky. "My father built this years ago," Daniel explained, lighting a small lamp that cast a warm glow around the room. "He taught me the constellations here when I was Samuel's age." Kate moved to the window, looking out at the star-filled sky. "It's beautiful." "I didn't know your father had an interest in astronomy. There's a lot about him, about both my parents, that few people know," Daniel said, coming to stand beside her. "They're private people by nature, which is partly why your friendship has meant so much to them. And to you." Kate asked softly, surprising herself with the boldness of the question. Daniel turned to face her fully, the lamplight casting half his face in shadow, half in golden light. "More than I expected," he admitted. "More than I perhaps had a right to hope." Kate's heart began to race at the intensity in his voice. "Daniel, please," he interrupted gently. "Let me speak while I have the courage. Katherine, these past months have shown me what my life has been missing. Not just someone to care for my parents, but someone who brings warmth and principle and intelligence into a house that had grown cold with routine." He took her hand, his touch sending a tremor through her. "I find myself thinking of you when we're apart, looking forward to our conversations. Admiring your strength and your kindness to others despite your own struggles." Kate could scarcely breathe, caught between joy at his words and fear of what they might lead to. "Daniel, we come from such different worlds." "No," he shook his head firmly. "We don't. I told you I wasn't born to wealth, and even if I had been, what matters is not where we began but who we choose to be, who we choose to be with." With gentle fingers, he tilted her chin up to meet his gaze. "I don't know if you could ever feel for me what I've come to feel for you. But I would count myself the most fortunate of men if you would give me the chance to court you properly." Kate's mind whirled with conflicting emotions: hope, fear, longing, and caution, all battling for supremacy. "What about Samuel?" she whispered. Daniel's expression softened further. "Samuel is part of you, Catherine, a part I've grown quite fond of. He deserves a father figure who will cherish him as much as his mother does." Tears pricked at Kate's eyes at the tenderness in his voice. "The town will talk," she warned. "The wealthy rancher and the poor widow, they'll say I trapped you somehow." "Let them talk," Daniel replied firmly. "Those whose opinions matter will see the truth that you've brought light back into my life in a way no one else could have." Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down and brushed his lips against hers, a kiss so gentle it was almost reverent, yet filled with a promise that made Kate's heart soar. When they parted, Kate looked up into his eyes and saw reflected there the same wonder she felt. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I would like that very much." Daniel's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, brilliant and full of promise for the day ahead. As they stood together in the starlight, Kate felt as though a new chapter was beginning, one filled with hope, with love, and with the family she had thought forever lost to her. Winter settled over Montrose with a peaceful blanket of snow that transformed the landscape into a pristine wonderland. For Kate and Samuel, it brought changes more profound than the shifting of seasons. Daniel courted Kate with old-fashioned propriety and unmistakable devotion. There were sleigh rides through snow-covered valleys, Sunday dinners with his parents, and quiet evenings by the fire when Samuel had gone to bed, talking of books and dreams and slowly sharing the stories of their lives before they had met. Kate learned of Daniel's struggles to build his cattle empire, the long nights, the risks taken, the failures overcome before success. He, in turn, listened with respect as she spoke of her marriage to Thomas, their journey west seeking a better life, and her determination to maintain their farm after his death. "You could have returned east to your family," Daniel observed one evening as they sat on her porch, bundled against the cold to watch the stars emerge. "This is Samuel's home," Kate replied simply. "And mine too now. The West gets into your blood, the openness, the possibility." "I couldn't imagine returning to city life." Daniel's gloved hand found hers, squeezing gently. "I'm selfishly glad you stayed." Through December, their relationship deepened, as did the bond between Daniel and Samuel. The boy who had never known his own father flourished under Daniel's patient attention, learning to ride a gentle pony, helping with simple ranch chores, and absorbing the older man's knowledge of the land and animals. For Christmas, Daniel insisted on hosting a celebration at the ranch house, inviting not only Kate and Samuel, but also several of his workers who had no family nearby. The house was festively decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons, and gifts were piled beneath a magnificent tree cut from the foothills. Samuel received a hand-carved chest set from George, a new coat from Martha, and from Daniel, a miniature saddle for the pony he had been learning to ride, a gift that made the boy's eyes widen with disbelief and joy. "Does this mean he's mine?" Samuel asked, looking from the saddle to Daniel with wonder. "If your mother approves," Daniel nodded, glancing at Kate with a question in his eyes. "It's far too generous," Kate began, but stopped at the look of disappointment on her son's face. "But yes, with my approval." "You'll need to care for him properly, Samuel." The boy's solemn promise and subsequent embrace nearly brought tears to Daniel's eyes, a tenderness Kate was coming to recognize in this man who showed the world only strength and confidence. Later, when the others had retired and Samuel slept contentedly in one of the guest rooms, Daniel led Kate to the quiet of his study. There, he presented her with a small, velvet-covered box. "Daniel," she protested softly, "you've already been too generous." "This is different," he said, his voice unusually solemn. "Open it, please." Inside was a delicate gold locket, oval-shaped with an intricate floral design etched on its surface. When Kate opened it, she found a tiny photograph of Samuel on one side. "The other side is for you to decide," Daniel explained quietly. "I thought perhaps a likeness of Thomas. Samuel should have a way to remember his father." The thoughtfulness of the gift, not just the valuable locket itself, but the consideration behind it, touched Kate deeply. Daniel, I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything, he assured her, helping her fasten the chain around her neck. I just wanted you to know that I understand Thomas will always be part of your life, part of Samuel. I would never wish to diminish his memory. Kate looked up at this remarkable man, her heart full to bursting with emotions she had thought forever lost to her. Thank you for understanding, she whispered, for everything. As January's deep cold settled over the valley, Kate continued her work at the ranch house, but the nature of her relationship with the Owens family had fundamentally changed. She was no longer simply an employee, but a welcome addition to their close-knit circle future daughter, in-law to Martha and George, whose health seemed to improve with each passing week in the presence of Kate and Samuel's youthful energy. The town's reaction to Daniel's courtship of the widow Galloway ranged from supportive to scandalized. Victoria Harrington made her disapproval known through pointed remarks at church services, while others like the kindly dressmaker Mrs. Peterson delighted in the romantic tale of the wealthy rancher who had found love where he least expected it. Pay them no mind, Daniel advised when Kate mentioned an especially cutting comment overheard in the general store. Their opinions matter far less than our happiness. By February, Daniel had begun making plans to expand Kate's farmhouse, drawing up designs for additional rooms and modern conveniences that would make it a proper home for a growing family. Though he owned a grand house in Denver and could have built an equally impressive mansion in Montrose, he understood Kate's attachment to the land she and Thomas had worked together. We'll keep the best of what's there, he promised, showing her sketches one snowy afternoon, and add what's needed for comfort. It will still be your farm, Katherine, just with a few improvements. The sensitivity of his approach, preserving what mattered to her while offering his resources to enhance their future together, confirmed for Kate what her heart already knew. Daniel Owens was a man unlike any she had encountered, one who valued her independence and spirit even as he sought to share his life with her. As winter began to loosen its grip on the land, with the first hints of spring appearing in longer days and occasional warm breezes, Daniel invited Kate for a ride to a scenic overlook above the valley. Samuel stayed behind with Martha and George, engaged in an increasingly competitive checkers tournament with the old man who had become like a grandfather to him. The hillside was still patched with snow, but wildflowers were beginning to emerge in protected sunny spots. Daniel spread a blanket in a sheltered area and produced a picnic basket containing wine, bread, cheese, and early strawberries, a luxury that must have been transported at considerable expense from warmer regions. This is beautiful, Kate said, looking out over the valley below where the town of Montrose lay nestled between rolling hills, with the ranch and her own small farm visible in the distance. I used to come up here when I first bought the ranch, Daniel told her, pouring wine into 2 glasses. When the responsibility seemed overwhelming or decisions too difficult, the perspective helped seeing how all the pieces fit together in the larger landscape. Kate accepted the glass, touched by this glimpse into his private thoughts. And now, do you still find decisions difficult? Daniel smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners in the way she had come to love. Some, but the most important one has become very clear. Setting aside his wine, he reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small box. Kate's breath caught as he moved to kneel before her on the blanket, taking her hand in his. Katherine Galloway, he began, his deep voice steady despite the emotion she could see in his eyes. When I returned to Montrose last fall, I came only to check on my parents, intending to leave again as soon as possible. I never expected to find someone who would change my perception of what truly matters in life. He opened the box, revealing a ring with a single perfect diamond set in intricate gold filigree. You've shown me that wealth means nothing without someone to share it with, someone who values character over currency, kindness over status, and love over all else. His fingers tightened gently around hers. I love you, Katherine, and I love Samuel as if he were my own. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife, allowing me to be a father to your son, and perhaps, God willing, building an even larger family together? Tears filled Kate's eyes as she looked at this man who had entered her life so unexpectedly and transformed it so completely. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, Daniel Owens, I will marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, though she had no idea when he had managed to determine her size, Kate felt a sense of rightness, of coming home after a long journey. When Daniel drew her into his arms, his kiss was both tender promise and passionate declaration, sealing their commitment under the vast Colorado sky. They were married in May, when the valley was alive with wildflowers and new growth. The ceremony took place on the expanded porch of Kate's farm, now transformed into a comfortable home that honored its humble beginnings while incorporating thoughtful improvements Daniel had designed with Kate's input. Martha and George watched proudly as their son pledged himself to the woman who had first entered their lives as a kind neighbor bringing fresh bread. Samuel stood solemnly beside them, understanding the significance of the day that would officially make Daniel his stepfather, though in his heart the bond had formed months ago. The town turned out in force, curiosity and goodwill overcoming any lingering skepticism about the match. Even Victoria Harrington made an appearance, though she departed shortly after the ceremony, her tight smile never quite reaching her eyes. As husband and wife shared their first dance on the new hardwood floor of their expanded home, Kate looked up at Daniel with wonder. "Did you ever imagine, when you first saw me in your parents' kitchen, that we would end up here?" Daniel's arms tightened around her waist. "No," he admitted with a smile. "I was too busy being suspicious of your motives to notice I was meeting the love of my life. And now?" She asked, her hands resting on his broad shoulders. "Now I thank God every day for sending a stubborn, proud, beautiful widow to feed my elderly parents," he replied, his voice husky with emotion. "Because in doing so, he led me to the family I didn't know I was missing." As twilight descended on their celebration, with lanterns glowing along the porch railings and the sound of laughter filling the air, Kate and Daniel stood together at the edge of their property, looking out over the land that had brought them together. "What happens now?" Kate asked softly, her head resting against her husband's shoulder. Daniel pressed a kiss to her temple. "Now, my love, we live our story day by day, season by season, together." And they did. Over the next decade, the Owens Galloway family flourished. Samuel grew into a thoughtful young man with his mother's intelligence and his stepfather's business acumen. He was joined by a sister, Eleanor, born a year after the wedding, and later by twin brothers, James and William, who inherited their father's height and their mother's determined spirit. Martha and George lived to see all 4 grandchildren reach school age, spending their final years surrounded by the family that had expanded so unexpectedly through one simple act of kindness, a widow bringing bread to an elderly couple. Daniel's business interests continued to prosper, but he arranged them to require less travel, prioritizing presence with his family over further expansion of his wealth. Kate, meanwhile, established a small school on their property, teaching not only their own children but those of ranch workers and neighboring farms, sharing the education her father had valued so highly. Their home became a gathering place for the community, a place where social distinctions melted away in the warmth of Katherine Owens's kitchen, and the generous welcome of a man who had discovered that true wealth lay in connections formed and kindness shared. And on quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the house settled into peaceful silence, Daniel and Kate would often sit together on their porch, watching the stars emerge over the Colorado mountains, their hands intertwined as they marveled at the journey that had brought them together. "Do you ever regret it?" Daniel asked once, many years into their marriage. "Marrying a man who questioned your intentions that first day," Kate smiled, the years having only deepened her love for this complex, honorable man. "How could I regret the best decision of my life? You saw my worth when others saw only my circumstances. You valued my independence even while offering support. You loved my son as your own from the very beginning." She leaned against him, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. "The millionaire cowboy who found the widow feeding his elderly parents changed my life in ways I could never have imagined." But more importantly, Daniel Owens, you helped me discover that love can find us in the most unexpected moments if our hearts remain open to its possibility. Under a canopy of stars, surrounded by the legacy they had built together, they sealed this truth with a kiss as tender and promising as their first testament to the enduring power of love that begins with a simple act of kindness and grows into a lifetime of joy.